Prabhupada often talked about the lover and the beloved. The pleasure for the lover is to actually please the beloved, and there isn't a concept of, kind of quid pro quo there, and we shouldn't go into it with that mentality. So again, even for the Nishkama Karma Yogis, there is the idea that I'm doing my actions, but I'm doing them for the pleasure of the Supreme. And again, in Bhagavad Gita 2.46, it says, Jnana Ataha, you understand the purposes of the Vedas, but only kind of, you don't need to act on that, from the platform of Buddha Yoga, you can satisfy the Lord. So it's actually that idea. We often talk about thinking, feeling and willing. Well, that thinking, feeling and willing, if it's materially tainted, will lead to material fall down. And if it's spiritually imbued, it will lead to actually ever more increasing devotional service. So if we remain fixed in that transcendental knowledge, we will become purified. And there is a purificatory process. There is no doubt about it. We have millions of lifetimes where we wouldn't turn towards Krishna and we get token reactions. But the analogy is given there from the water and the well. And again, there's wells all over the place for drinking and then for washing and stuff like that. But you can carry out all those actions if you just go to the shore of the lake or down by the river. All the water is there and there's this endless supply of water. So, that analogy is given so that, if we're detached from what we're doing but attached to serving Krishna, then all of those things will be met at any stage along the path. And it's the same with the Jnana path. And in this connection, before we move on, we might ask, why would we bother? Just give it all up. We'll surrender, we'll stop all the action, and we'll take to the path of just knowledge. And that's an important point because it's a problematic point, and our tendency is by nature to be attached. So actually just saying I'm renouncing everything and I'm giving it all up is not as easy as we sometimes think. And it's important to remember. So, Prabhupada did use that word, the serpents, and again, in Natural Geographic style, the serpents may be hibernating, but as soon as you let your guard down, out they come, and they come in the masses, and we don't really want to have that. If we have to eat, we have to support our families, we have to benefit social order and society in general, and so there's a need for us to be active. And there's a need for us to have sense interaction. So within that context, withdrawing all the senses and going off into a process where we're just esoterically seeking knowledge is not viable for the vast majority of people. And especially when we're in such a conditioned human form. And you have to ask again, is it necessary? So the notion of giving everything up and basically chasing knowledge while we're withdrawing the senses artificially is actually not really an option. It's not really an option. So therefore we have the Varnashram system that actually goes through the different varnas, like, kind of you're working within your prescribed duties, but you also have the ashram system, so that like gradually over the course of a lifetime people, progress and they give up attachments that were maybe associated with different stages of their lives. So that's there. And Krishna relates to this, even Prahlad Maharaj said to his school friends, you're going to spend so many years in play, so many years of rehearsal like this, and going on. And we're reading that this week. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, happy is the Kshatriya for whom fighting opportunities come, because that's the nature of a Kshatriya. He was protect, a military kind of commander, he was protect. And that's the way it is. So we don't really want to be exposing ourselves to natural geographic catastrophes with the senses coming out unwarranted. What we do is we acknowledge we have sense issues, but we try to dovetail that in Krishna consciousness. Otherwise we go into a steady fall down, a spiralling fall down, and we have seen that happen unfortunately over and over again. And we've been involved in that over millions of lifetimes, no doubt, from the first time. And the reason that it is that concept of I, me and mine, that concept of I want to enjoy, all of a sudden, bam, you're hit with some sense, desire, and thinking, feeling, willing comes in, and that illusory covering comes back over to us, and it's a kind of a narcissistic propensity where, you forget, you lose the reason And even though you know Krishna is there, and even though you understand you shouldn't be doing something, the attraction is too much, the senses are so uncontrolled that absolutely with narcissism you go to enjoy. And that is just can happen so easily. And it's a material thing, it's a material illusion, but also material conditioning, because we have somewhere stopped for one moment to think about serving Krishna. And it's actually described as mityahara. It's like a miserly concept, you know, where we want everything, we're envious, you know, we want that enjoyment for ourselves, and that's really important. So again, when we're looking at moving on to, you know, that withdrawal of our senses, that idea that we're going to pursue knowledge, Krishna is very prescriptive about how we pursue that knowledge. He's saying that, like, you know, it has to come in a certain way. Otherwise, like, we stay as bewildered as ever. And people who seek knowledge of, you know, kind of philosophical speculation, you know, why are we here, but they leave God out of the picture. They spend their whole life chasing their tails, basically speaking, with theoretical emptiness. And we see this in some scientific endeavours. So science mentioned several times in this chapter with Narada Muni. But we see this in so many scientific endeavours. Somebody may spend a whole lifetime trying to solve one equation to work out one tiny facet of the cosmic manifestation, where Krishna just, like, you know, he's creating, you know, and all the knowledge is there in this one book, Srimad Bhagavatam. So, you know, that kind of pursuit for mundane knowledge without connection to Krishna is actually detrimental to our existence. And but basically speaking, what happens again is we can very easily fall into that trap. And I say this with like a strong kind of wording of warning, that somebody who first comes into a little bit of knowledge, a small fund of knowledge, because they can only take on a small fund of knowledge, they get a sudden rush. And we see this often when people come to Krishna consciousness. Sometimes somebody gets so encapsulated with the philosophy and really takes it with relish, and they take in what level of that they can, the small amount that they can, and all of a sudden they want to renounce everything, and, you know, they want to become very knowledgeable and some kind of a jnani yogi. And then they decide to give up everything and just exist. I don't want a job, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, I'm going to study all about, you know. But it's actually not about the serving of Krishna, you know. Like, I'm not saying everybody does this, by the way, but, you know, we do see people who do this, and they get so much into, I want to just acquire all this knowledge, but they're not really dovetailing that. You know, acquisition of knowledge comes with, you must do something with it. So that has to be dovetailed into devotional service. There must be an absolute use for it. Otherwise, like, our brain doesn't even have the capacity for it. But like that, just acquisition of knowledge for the sake of I'm gaining the knowledge, again, is a material concept. If you're not dovetailing that in Krishna's service, and if you're not doing that as a bona fide service of it, or a dedicated service, then that's a problem, you know. And then people become dissatisfied because they think, I'm gaining so much knowledge, I'm becoming more knowledgeable than you. Their ego comes into it, and then you see them floating around, just like Narada Muni, only for Narada Muni's on the pure platform. They're floating around and they're trying to go to all these different sources of knowledge, and they end up just becoming completely polluted and bewildered by such a knowledge, and losing their whole identity in terms of who they really are as a person, but also what that connection with Krishna is. And it happens so easily, you know, like somebody sticks a tag on it as everything, you know, Shastric, everything, you know, Puranic, and everything, you know, kind of Indian even. You know, I've gone to some place in India, and I've dug out into some great teaching, and, you know, no context of what they're doing at all. And they're just picking up all different thought patterns and bits and snippets of philosophy, and they don't even have like a steady flow of that philosophy. They don't know how much interpretation is there, and all of a sudden they feel, you know, they know everything. So and that's a prime example. Like, you know, people will talk to me all the time, and I mention Varnashram Dharma, and then they come back to the caste system, you know, a totally polluted abomination of what Krishna has given us in Bhagavad Gita. And he actually is the constructor of this system. But at the same time, you know, we've seen how it has been used in a very negative way for centuries. and yet it's become a tyranny and caste system where it discriminates against people. And yes, in the Bhagavad Gita, the same construction of Varnashram, Krishna says in the same Bhagavad Gita, you know, the learned person, the sage, they see everybody with equal vision. And sure, that's not the question. If you don't have an authorized version of philosophy, and people become bewildered, they just start picking up and then they start interpreting it and making their own summary of it. And this is what happens. And then when we progress beyond that, then we come to the total renunciation, and people following Ashtanga yoga or Jnana yoga, where a meditative process comes into it. And in that connection, then we can understand that, basically speaking, people in this lifetime just really don't have the lifespan to do that. In chapter 4, there's a huge section given over to the acquirement of knowledge, and then whether it's tainted with materialism or coming to the spiritual platform where we see that. But even with that, you know, the knowledge of Krishna, where they actually progress to what we would call the marginal energy, or the impersonal aspect of Krishna, is actually condemned quite, you know, strongly by Srila Prabhupada. But also, when we're coming to the practice of meditative process, in the Ashtanga process, or in the Jnana process, you know, we haven't got that together, and we don't really have the wherewithal to do that as in ancient times. For instance, we're short-lived, and Krishna is very prescriptive in terms of the yoga ladder. He's saying that we should go to a secluded place. You know, we're all in isolation, but we're not that secluded. You know, so in terms of seclusion, that's a hard thing to do, you know. We're not given to be on our own all the time. And there's disturbances. If we, you know, like when you say go to a secluded place and you're talking about the great sages meditating, like there was no disturbances, you know, like they could sit there for thousands of years. You know, you try sit even in this kind of good weather that we've been having this great spring, and sit for any length of time outside in the forest, you're going to get bitten by something and drive you crazy, you know. And so the thing about it is this meditative process is actually a very, very difficult process, you know. And there is a lot of people who talk about meditation, and the meditation is actually it's very clear that you have to be in a certain position. So coming from a jnana to a dhyana process is actually it's not as easy as you think in a progression. And in that connection, Ananda Goswami gives a very clear explanation about the concept of inquiry and nishta being fixed, and outlining the links and the path of action and activity. Karma yoga and the path of philosophical inquiry, and then you know, Jnana yoga. And he points to the reality and the conclusion that action in Krishna consciousness is actually superior than speculative inquiry, and devoid of any purpose or true purpose. And that's a very concise way of saying it, that, you know, speculative inquiry is actually, you know, subordinate to action in Krishna consciousness. And of course, I'm paraphrasing here, he says it in a much more elegant and concise way, but he describes one who practices either of the paths in the proper way, they'll become nishta, or fixed. And that's, you know, what he describes as being on a firm standing. So it's a nice way of explaining the underlying principles and the analysis of inquiry in terms of connection to Krishna, or God. And again, Krishna says in chapter 4, text 11, he actually refers to those seeking knowledge and that they surrender unto me, and then he rewards them. So there is actually a very concise prescription for gaining of that knowledge and what that knowledge is. And again, he actually says that you should approach a spiritual master and have that given in a very bona fide way. And he said, originally I have given this information. Krishna has given this information, this process of gaining knowledge, and he gave it, you know, down in specific succession. But actually, he uses the word in this way of bhajanti, unto me, surrender unto me. It's not like, inquire in and around me or have this information. It's unto me, very personal. And without that assimilation of that fact, when we're trying to do a meditative process or we're trying to actually gain knowledge, it just doesn't work, because we end up with some kind of impersonal or incorrect solution. So Bhajanti is surrender unto me. Krishna prescribes that. He's not mincing his words here. And he has said that I've given this, but because basically speaking, we're short-lived, we have bad memories, we're prone to flaws, that actually we're forgetful, and the disciplic succession is broken. And then Krishna, he actually manifests himself again to actually re-establish those principles. So he actually very prescriptive that we must get that from a bona fide source. So knowledge and inquiry must come from a bona fide source. And then Prabhupada actually uses very, very strong words again in his purport. And he said that people who are actually not seeking to have that surrender unto Krishna, and they're more attracted into the Brahman effulgence and oneness with Krishna, want to be God. There's still that concept, I want to be God, I want to be one with God. That's there. And but Prabhupada refers to it as spiritual suicide, which is quite heavy, spiritual suicide. They're remarkably strong words. And basically speaking, there's three aspects to the Supreme. There's the Brahman realization, and then the localized Paramatma realization, and then there's the absolute truth, Bhagavan, the original personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada says when you stop here at this, Brahman and personal realization, I want to merge into Krishna's effulgence, he says like suicide, like spiritual suicide. And the problem about that is you do not gain access into the spiritual world at that platform, and you are liable to fall back down into any amount of species of life or anywhere in practice along the way. It's a downward spiral. So, and that downward spiral is because you're trying to negate your personality. You're trying to negate your individuality to become less than individual, but not only that, but to be less than individual, but on a oneness with God, who is actually the supreme individual personality of Godhead. So the whole thinking and concept is quite flawed, and this is where the Mayavadis have a really difficult problem. They have a major flaw in their philosophy, and Prabhupada was very strong at preaching about this Mayavada kind of concept. So you can't really reach the absolute truth by pseudo knowledge acquisition or meditation, or you can't actually reach the absolute truth by an imperfect understanding of the supreme individuality of Godhead. And that pseudo spiritual or elevated knowledge is actually not taking you out of the total material concept. It's you have a liability to fall down again. And it's again that analogy there, the sunshine and the sun planet. You have to actually understand the difference between those, and any amount of incomplete knowledge will not actually change that. So negating individuality is not an option. And when we look at again that principle of trying to meditate, we are short-lived, and in Satya Yuga it's like people lived 100,000 years, in Treta Yuga it's 10,000, Dwapara Yuga it's 1,000, and we have 100 years, So in this idea of the principle of meditative process, Krishna is not immense in words. He said you must sit in a certain position, you must perfect these, positions, you must sit upright, you must focus on tip of your nose, you must actually withdraw the breath, and reverse the breath, and who can do that in this condition? We just can't do it. So it's not really a practical proposition for people in this age. And this meditative process, again, it's really something that is beyond our concept, and even not in our tradition, but even in the Bible, it states that people were of a longer duration of lifespan, And you have the likes of Methuselah, like 969 years or something like that, and Noah is around the 900 mark, and so that's why he managed to build an ark to put everybody in for a cosmic annihilation kind of thing. But because he wasn't doing this over 10 years, it was a long lifespan. And and then gradually when you come down to the likes of Moses, you're talking about maybe around the 120 mark or so, which isn't far off where our maximum duration of life is within Kali Yuga. So there is a real kind of correlation there, that even within the book of Genesis you can see this, that like the lifespans that we're talking about with some of these personalities are actually similar to what we're talking about in people, say around like Dwapara Yuga time, where they would be able to meditate, and even beyond that, like we're talking again about Hiranyakashipu. Hiranyakashipu like meditated for so long, but for material gain, material intent, and actually adharic, anything but Krishna. And so what was the benefit of this? All these austerities, that in the end, like he couldn't control the fact that he was destined to die. And and you have examples of Prahlad and Dhruva Maharaj, both very young boys, but that's exceptional. What young 5-year-old do you know that's going to go to the forest and actually meditate on Krishna until Krishna appears to them? It's inconceivable to us. So this meditative process, and again, it's really it's not viable in this age. And between the Gyanis, kind of this idea, this bhaya that they have, this fear of spiritual identity, and this kind of frustration that they have, it's like Croda, they have this idea that they're going to be frustrated and angry because they encounter this spirituality that they're trying to manifest and they can't, and then they go looking for it somewhere else and something else, and then they progress onto some kind of trying to develop some mystic cities. Now there are people who develop mystic cities, and Hanuman is a classic example. Hanuman displayed so many mystic cities, growing so large, heavy, picking up things as light and flying across the air, and so many different things. But they're not going to connect you to Krishna. The difference between Hanuman and these people who try to practice, manifesting something in their hand, or bringing something close to them, is that they're still in the concept of I, me, and mine. And whereas Hanuman was a devout Bhakta, he was actually surrendered soul to Lord Ram, who's Krishna himself. And so this meditative process, even if you can manage to do all these prescriptions and actually meditate in that particular way, unless the end focus is that I want to connect with Krishna, then it's a futile activity. Now, in terms of meditation, again, people might come back and say, I do meditation, whatever, like that. But, you do have to take that into context. I teach meditation. I teach meditation on 2 different levels, on a clinical level, and then also in terms of trying to get people to focus in particular situations. And but it's a very different thing. It's not the meditation we're talking about in terms of Bhagavad Gita. Meditation in that connection is an activity of sorts where we're trying to cause some stress reduction on somebody's mind in a given material concept. It's not like we're trying to take them to the elevated platform in terms of that. And some people do use meditation in terms of trying to get people to focus on a spiritual aim. But the thing about it is that it's not the same level of prescription that Krishna is given here for Jnana Yoga. And even in Patanjali's 8-limb system, if you look at that and actually really look at it, and you're talking about going from Nayama and Pranayama and all the way up, until you get to Samadhi, it's actually such a convoluted process that not many people would be able to follow that track through of the 8-limbed process. And even with that, the people who interpret his sutras are, usually getting to Samadhi as being some impersonal kind of situation of union with, the oneness, and merging into the oneness of God, rather than actually looking at his concept that actually you should be, you know, linking with God in a devotional way. And again, like, you know, when you're having a look at that, it's really, you know, something to be considered. So we're not really set up to do this kind of, you know, meditative process, whether by the Ashtanga or just like, you know, sitting in the forest and you know, meditating on your nose. We're not really in a situation to do that. And in terms of understanding, while all of this is happening, while we actually gain that, you know, kind of knowledge, or while we try to implement that meditative process, the senses are still there. We're still in a material condition. And as Prabhupada keeps bringing us back to that point, the senses, like serpents, will reimagine, because it's an artificial state for us to be in. We are not geared up to it at all. And even, you know, to make that transition from jnana to dhyana and then on to bhakti, you know, there is another ladder that runs along with that gaining of knowledge, and that is like the process from shraddha or faith to prema, pure love of God. And that itself is a process that's running kind of not even parallel, but running on a different level altogether. And you know, trying to link those is really it's really very difficult. And but we need to nurture bhakti. And when you're trying to negate the senses, and when you're trying to actually meditate and focus without understanding that we're practically incapable of doing that, or without having full fixation, and I'm talking about full fixation at a level that I have no concept of, on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we are not nurturing our bhakti. And you can nurture that bhakti at any stage of development. So if you're not nurturing that bhakti, well, then the creeper doesn't actually develop. And in terms of people who actually try to negate their identity, is in Mayavada kind of approach, they never nurture their bhakti. So like that will never happen. And there is one sloka from Madhya-lila, let's see if I can get here, one sloka from Madhya-lila 19:155, Tahan Vishtari Tahana Pali Prema Vala Tune Ihan Alisha She Nichasravan Adi Jala. The creeper greatly expands in Goloka Vrindavan planet. There it produces the fruit of love for Krishna. Although remaining in the material world, the gardener regularly sprinkles the creeper with water or hearing and chanting. So if you're not constantly engaging in nurturing that devotional aspect of your life, you're trying to negate the senses and you're trying to give up the identity, and you're focused on that, well, actually you're not developing your devotional creeper. And that actually expands in Goloka Vrindavan, the place where Krishna is. And that Goloka Vrindavan is the place where the personality of Krishna is. So again, we hear that from Narada, and Narada says, intelligence engaged in my devotion cannot be thwarted at any time, even at the time of creation, as well as at the time of annihilation. Your remembrance will continue by my mercy. So there is a personalization there by Krishna. He's saying to Narada, it's his mercy, and that mercy can't come from a personal concept, it comes from a personal concept. So in that relation, even though we are trying to describe that there's a progression between the yoga ladder, if you execute all of them perfectly, it can happen. But if you don't execute those perfectly, it will not happen. So sitting alone in one place, I could ask you to do an exercise. How many of you during the course of this one class have been able to sit perfectly still in one place? And I can guarantee you it will be zero. Nobody has sat still, not me, not any of you. So if we can't sit still for the duration of this one class, now I'm not saying that, like, you know, I would encourage people to sit still by an enthralling discourse and do my best. But, you know, if you can't sit still for that length of time, how could you engage in that meditative process? For you would sit still, withdrawing the senses, without distraction, totally focused on the tip, upright on the tip of your nose, and with total internal focus, either on the Paramatma, as is in one description, or on the tip of your nose. You just can't do it. And again, if I was to actually say, I'll do an exercise with you and ask you to do two things, one of them being that, not just yet, but in 1 minute, if you were just to sit up straight now, and if you were to close your eyes now and think of nothing, and we'll do that for 15 seconds. I'll keep an eye on the clock. So if we all do that now, just close your eyes for 15 seconds and think of nothing. So that's 15 seconds. So how many of you thought of absolutely nothing? How many of you are thinking that you should be thinking about nothing? It's quite impossible to do. But yet, focusing on Krishna when you engage your senses in Krishna is not so impossible to do. So what if I was to ask you again to repeat the same exercise? Now I know there's some people out there who just won't, and they don't want to cooperate with that, but they might think, Nanda Maya's lost the head altogether, and that could well be a fact, but knockdown mentality. But if I was to ask you to do it again and do for a little bit longer, but this time while you close your eyes and sit straight, I'll actually try to give you some indication of how to think of Krishna. Now, I'm not saying I'm qualified to do that, get your bhakti stimulated, but just to give you an idea of the mundaneness of trying to withdraw the senses and control the mind, to somehow suffusing your mind and dovetailing everything that you have in Krishna consciousness. So if I was actually to ask you to do that again, as uncomfortable as it would be, I'd ask you to sit straight again and to close your eyes now. And this time I want you to visualize Srila Prabhupada, to see him in your mind and to notice every single detail, how his eyes are, his unique smile, how he sometimes held his head aloft as he chants, how his hands are when he clinks the cartels, and how his lotus feet are when he's sitting with his feet crossed. And then if you transpose that onto Krishna, whether you're in Govindadweep and you're thinking of Radha Govinda, or in Dublin you're thinking of Panchatattva, or indeed your home deities, Jagannath. And if you look and then you see how in Dublin Panchatattva is leaning towards you, the smile on Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda's face, how his outstretched hands are there, lovingly calling you to his praise. The decoration on Sri Govinda today, Radharani, how she holds her bouquet, what jewels she had on her head, her crown, how the deities were decorated so nicely with tulsi leaves on her feet. And if I asked you then to open your eyes, how many of you could visualize Krishna within your eyes, or within your mind's eye, as opposed to trying to think of nothing? And although they're just two small exercises, they are something that we can practice, and we can practice those when we're chanting. And that meditative process is superior to anybody who's trying to negate the senses or the mind or control the mind by sitting in the forest in this age. This is not the process for this age. So they're just two small exercises, and we could do them, yes, with Shruti music on the background, and we could do all kinds of different things to make those viable exercises. But if you can't sit still for 15 seconds now, or if you can't engage your mind fully for 20 seconds in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then what hope would we have to practice Jnana Yoga? And that finally brings us to the process of Bhakti. And in Bhakti Yoga, it's actually the supreme yoga. It's the yoga of devotional service to Krishna. And as I said throughout this class, and as Narada revealed at the end of his text, is that actually is the only thing that gives satisfaction and full satisfaction to the soul. And Krishna says this, and he says this without negating any senses or sense of being in a human body or having to carry out activity. He says, just fix your mind upon me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and engage all your intelligence in me. So there's two of them down. Thus you'll always live with me without a doubt. O dear Arjuna, O winner of wealth, you cannot fix your mind upon me without deviation. Then follow the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga, Abhasa Yogena, and this way develop a desire to attain me. So that's really, really everything in a nutshell. So if you can't do all these processes, this is the formula. Just fix your mind upon me, meditation, engage your intelligence, jnana, and activity. If you can't do that, follow the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga. So regulative principles in your action and surrender everything to Krishna. That's the formula. So the yoga ladder can be a long process, or else alternatively, this is actually the formula that we engage in. And it's been even made easier in this age for people in Kali Yuga. To actually focus on Krishna rather than us trying to be the controller. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchinananda Vigraha Anadya Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. Krishna is known as Govinda, is the supreme Godhead, Ishvara Parama, and he is actually eternally blissful in the spiritual body, and he's the origin of all origins. So if we can focus on that and serve him in a loving way on the Bhakti platform, then that is the ultimate goal of yoga. And again, we sing it in Brahma Samhita, Govindam Adipurushan Tahamba Jami, the Adipurushan. Krishna is the original primeval Lord. And then there's multiple references throughout of Krishna being the supreme absolute, quite clearly in all the scriptures, but especially in Bhagavad Gita. And that lesser worship of the demigods will not actually be bring you to that platform, because it's tinged with material gain. You know, I'll pray for such and such to such and such a demigod. So the practicality or impracticality of Jnana Yoga is actually clearly outweighed by the process of Bhakti Yoga. On any level, Bhakti Yoga is actually attainable. And it's attainable through the process or the alternative ladder of entering into contact with Krishna and Krishna's devotees, then engaging in sadhana bhakti, then elevating yourself to Bhava Bhakti and finally Prema Bhakti. And in that way, there isn't a drop. And we can see this meditative process hasn't worked for so many people and sages throughout the Bhagavatam, including Vishwamitra, which we mentioned earlier on. He actually fell down when he saw the beauty of Menaka. And then similarly, when Haridas Thakur, who was engaged in total absorption in the holy name and direct communication with Krishna through his holy name, then actually Maya didn't stand a chance. So that actually engagement in our senses will bring the rewards at any stage, even in the offensive stage, that if the motivation is there to cultivate bhakti and devotion to Krishna, well then it negates all of the processes of the yoga ladder in the sense that if the material motivation is there. So it's a very slow progress if you don't have that fixation on devotional service, but actually superseding that is engaging directly at any stage in the process of Bhakti Yoga. And this is the conclusion of Narada Muni, and it's also the exemplification of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that he has actually given us this process, and he has this mood: even if you crush me with your worshipful embrace, I'm still you're still my worshipful Lord, so I'll serve you under any conditions. And Srila Prabhupada came to us with that mercy and with that process of devotional service. So in terms of why the yoga path and the restraint of senses doesn't give us that benefit, is because we don't develop love for Krishna. And as living entities, we want to have that love, because love gives pleasure, and we're seeking enjoyment. We're seeking that a sense of love and connection, and that can only be fully achieved in a connection with Krishna. So we have a chance. We can go through the yoga ladder, or we can act on the platform of bhakti even in an immature stage and develop on that platform. And I give again, to go back to the lift and the elevator, you can go up to a certain number of floors in one lift, but if you want to get to the executive suite, you actually can go the express lift. Or you want to go, on a fire engine ladder, and without climbing up the ladder, you can go just hoist it straight up. And that is actually how we see Bhakti Yoga, that it can be performed at any stage, and it's the most potent stage to actually engage in that by chanting the holy name at the very start, and then gaining your knowledge and dovetailing your activities from the very start. And then Krishna says this, I'm seated in everyone's heart, and from me comes remembrance, knowledge and forgetfulness. About all the Vedas am I to be known. Indeed, I'm the compiler of the Vedanta and the knower of the Vedas. So Krishna is the conclusion of all of these other processes, and he's seated in our hearts. So if we reciprocate, remember what I said about the promise, the contract that Krishna makes, I will reciprocate. That they're no mean words. Krishna is saying that to us. So if we want to have that mood of surrender, the first thing we need to do is understand that there is a higher process. There is the process of surrender for everything that we do. We do it with the focus on Krishna, and we have to give up that concept of I'm the controller and I'm the enjoyer. And again, the reward for that, Krishna says, and to sum it up, Yoginam api sarve sham madgatanam tala maha shravanam bhajate yo mam sama yuktamo mata. Of all the yogis, I'm the one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me, is most intimately united with me in yoga, and that is the highest of all. That's my opinion. No mean words, that's my opinion. So it's the opinion of Krishna that if you engage everything with him, you're totally fixed in a loving service to him. They're most intimate. They are the most intimate, united with him. And again, as I said, we need to be really focusing on what Krishna is saying to us. And he's saying they're the highest of all. Devotional loving service is intimately engaged. And we sing this every Kartik in that song, whose service is imbued with intimacy, that there's a loving relationship there. And Krishna says this in Bhagavad Gita 6:47. So next time we're reading Krishna, we should be putting those post-it notes there, and every time he makes one of these promises, we should be going, I need to focus in on that, because Krishna is saying this to us, and we need to take his word seriously. And Prabhupada said, as it is. And we need to actually really be studying this. So it's not without surprise that Narada Muni has used this word of surrendering to Mukunda, the giver of liberation, because only in that pure devotional service can we become satisfied and can we gain liberation, as in become completely united with Krishna in Prema Bhakti. So I hope I've given some kind of overview. It's very hard to do here when you're sitting in a vacant room looking at the back of your phone, but I hope I've done that without any offences or without any confusion, and do beg anybody's forgiveness if I've made any offences. If you've asked any questions or comments down there, I will not be able to see them. My gadget doesn't work that way when I'm doing anything like this, and sometimes I can get on and sometimes I can't, and so if you don't see me commenting on your classes, it's not that I'm not there. It's I don't know, it's the way my gadget is set up, and sometimes our internet isn't good. And I'll also finish off by saying how fortunate we are to be given extremely this opportunity to engage in devotional service. And with that in mind, and the lockdown, and having all the effects of the lockdown across the board, I'm going to ask, if I can, for everybody to encourage to keep doing that, not only within your heart and your mind, but also to keep doing that without causing hardship to yourself or anything like that, but to keep supporting the temples. The service is going on so nicely at Govinda Dweep, but obviously they are in lockdown on Govinda Dweep, even though they're trying to do a massive amount of gardening and growing for Krishna in case there is some economic crash. And but also the same in Dublin, they're still trying to give out prasadam to people, and they do want to really establish that again as quickly as possible, as soon as they're able to open, so that the prasadam, the sanctified mercy, goes out, but the temple is also supported, and we can continue with the programs there. So do, if there's without hardship you can manage, do keep supporting the temples. It's really, really important by any amount at all, because there is no way we can keep going as it is. And also the one that's close to my heart, please keep supporting Radha Govinda's cows. This gives pleasure to Govinda. We worship Govinda, the primary of the Lord, and he comes, Surabir Abhipalyantam, he comes with his cows. So although we're all in lockdown, although we're technically separated, these gadgets are keeping us somehow connected. But also remember that the Sevikas have to keep the service going on, and both for Panchatattva and Radha Govinda, and obviously for the cows. And in that way, although we're limited by our actual Sangha at the moment, we can actually still perform devotional service to the temples. So thank you very much, Hare Krishna, and hopefully we have focused on something today that's going to be beneficial. Very well.